Hello and welcome to the PropTech Hot Seat on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon, the show where we explore trends and technologies driving innovation across the built environment. This show is brought to you in partnership with PropTech Ireland, the hub for innovators, investors and indeed for industry leaders. In the PropTech Hot Seat today is Arya Poor, CEO of Binaric. Arya, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be on your show. It's great.
Thank you, Arya. Delighted. And look, we always love to see an Irish prop tech, because so often we're featuring stories of innovators from across the world. But obviously, we love to see when people are developing what you refer to off air as an Irish solution to an Irish problem, because actually in the past that hasn't necessarily meant a good thing, but in your case it absolutely does. So you might just talk to our audience about Binaric and what it is that the company provides.
No, that's great. Well, Binaric is a technology company that specializes in providing innovative software solution for property management industry. We are passionate about transforming how property management is done. Our software streamlines processes, improvement efficiency, and enhances overall experience for property developers, managers, and also indeed tenants. We believe in harnessing the power of technology to make property management simpler and more efficient. In terms of where we sit within the property industry, and obviously that was a big question, where we really sit in the whole tech. We really, Binaric is at the edge of technology, or bringing technology to real estate, so that we can offer a suite of digital tools and platform that addresses the challenges faced by property developers, managers, HBs, and local authorities here in the country, and also obviously the tenants. We're here to make the property industry more accessible, efficient, and transparent for everyone involved.
Very good. And tell me, Arya, how long is the company in operation?
We are operation just right before COVID, so we started richly January 2020, 4 years ago at this stage, just about, yes.
Very good. So you're just coming out of the startup stage, and I know that you are supported by Enterprise Ireland. You're part of the HSBU, which is always a good indicator as well. Arya, how did you come to tackling this particular problem? Do you have a background in software development? Do you have a background in housing delivery? Where did you come to this problem from?
I have a software background myself. I have been technologist. I've been graduate from electrical engineering in DIT in Kevin Street. Done technology courses in DIT, and almost got a few colleges, believe it or not. Worked with the big enterprise companies in the past, big names, and I suppose, at some stages of your career, you figure out, well, I know the technology, and how can I, use it for something good for the society, and what can I actually do? Well, my philosophy for starting Binaric was about how could my background help some real problem that exists at a time, or still is, the social housing, the housing in general, private sector housing, or supply and demand was a big issue. And that's where I wanted to add value by examining what is happening. So I joined some housing providers to study what is happening. I partnered up with them, and literally we started a collaboration, a very healthy partnership, understood a lot of problems, and also we identified a lot of opportunities, which we are utilizing at the moment. So it's a win-win situation for us. In a way, we learned a lot, we fixed some of the problems, and there are lots of issues to be fixed. And that's where Binaric was born to just fix some issues. Well, hopefully you're really trying.
Very good. No, I like that you understood the skill set that you had and tried to apply them to some of the largest social problems that we have. And I think that's a very brave thing to do, actually, because when we look at housing, we might know that, second only to the cost of living, housing is kind of the crisis of our day. And obviously, usually that's healthcare. But housing and healthcare have really been jockeying for position in recent years. But in terms of housing, there are so many different facets to that it can be difficult when you're outside of it to say, how can technology move this along? So what made you reach out to the approved housing bodies?
Well, that's where we started from. That's one thing. And they were very approachable, very easy to work with. They really wanted to fix the problem. Obviously, a lot of them are, like almost all of them in this country, are charity organizations. So they want to get best value for money. And also they wanted to provide the best, property and, get as many people in the houses as possible. And how could we do that? How could we reduce the number of empty properties, for example? How could we, as soon as we build, we find tenants for it? How could we, reducing the screening time, onboarding time? How could we maximize the value? So that's, I suppose, the technology, it's just a tool. Once you understand what needs to be done and what information needs to be passed on to which department or how to all the stakeholders, and that's how you could organize the whole thing. Once the data is organized, it's all the actions now, and utilize the information in the correct way, and also making the approvals, screenings more streamlined. What's not needed, let's not have it, rather than just have it for sake of historical information or historical processes. So we looked at the process improvement. We looked at, a process mapping. We looked at the legislations. We looked at what really needed, rather than just what is nice to have. So, we had the crisis. When you're at a crisis, you need to take action. And that's what we really did. And housing associations really helped us, and we also helped them as much as we could.
I think that's a fantastic way to articulate it. I love that you were really going in search of impact. As a software developer, I can see how process improvement, that would be your go-to. And I know you touched on some of the problems there you're dealing with, like maybe trying to reduce periods of vacancy, or, the things that cause that, or the things that delay people going in. But actually, and I know this from the frustration of software developers that we've engaged in the past, that actually, in order to do anything, you have to start by agreeing the problem. And actually, that can be a really tedious first step. So actually, in terms of agreeing the problems, how did you go about this approach? Because I think it's a really interesting one, and I'd like to understand it better, so that if there's other innovators listening in, or indeed other organizations, and they're wondering how to untangle maybe some of the webs that they currently have, really to take it back to a starting point here. So actually, when you were sitting down, did you start with a problem in mind, or was there a process in trying to understand or maybe prioritize the problems?
Correct. That's exactly what was coming to my mind, because the problems exist, obviously, not only in this country, but almost in every country around the world. Some countries, they have a little bit less problem, or more, but including Scandinavian countries, they also have still problems with housing demands and meeting the demand and so on. But we weren't we didn't have any shortage of problems, or agreeing these ones are actually problems. Earlier on, as I became part of the senior management of or advisors of a few places that providing housing. So we agreed on what is the real problem, but exactly in terms of prioritizing it in a right order, so that the tenants, or people in the waiting lists, could get a benefit as quick as possible. How could we really do that? So really, you're prioritizing it based on, your demand, and how could you put a roof on top of somebody's head as soon as possible. That was number one. Number two was that, how could we streamline the funding, the development life cycle itself? How could we really streamline, how many properties are we building? Where are the planning permissions? And how could we streamline the approval process internally within the board of these organizations themselves, the feasibility studies, and how could we put in the information on the right people or people's fingertips, rather than just well, we feel that we should build the houses here or there. So as a software company, or as an individual, I like to work with the reality, the data, rather than just poor planning, because we need to do that, build the properties, places that you have a planning permission, so you don't have to wait another 2 years for planning permission. You acquire land in the right place with the access to the public services, bus routes, education, and so on. And how do you really put all these things together? And also, you have to make sure that, well, this site is going to be feasible to build, because you have a limited budget as a charity, as even local authorities. Now there's obviously LDA. It's really getting involved in this kind of activities. So prioritizing what's needed for the customer and how could we build more. So basically, these two categories were the main categories that were dictating what should we look at first.
Okay, and just, I suppose I'm conscious that because you were looking at the approved housing body sector, they had the advantage of you not having to look at the demand side, because their demand comes from the local authorities' housing list. So actually, I can see that would be in some way, that's one of the knowns that you have as a software developer that you mightn't have had, say, if you were dealing with an institutional investor. Because is it fair to say actually your software is at this time it's only for residential, is it?
Well, it's asset management, residential. It's a development side of it. It's proactive and reactive maintenance. It's all of that under one umbrella, really.
Very good. But it's primarily social housing that you were focused on initially. But I know you're at an exciting stage of expansion, so you might just talk us through maybe where the company is now.
Yes. But obviously, the social housing was one aspect, and then the government announced a new scheme called cost rental, for example. So we are the software provider for cost rental for across the nationally in Ireland, and we ran all the application from the very start to the very end. So that was a new service that they brought in. So we created a platform called select.com. And with that, we created such a way that everybody had this equal opportunity, and there would be legislation, income threshold, and all would apply, and they will see the results. So it's totally fair. There wouldn't be a black box somewhere we don't know what's happening. So it was very fair, I suppose, to the applicants, and was very fair to the service providers, because nobody could ask them, I know this person or I know that person, and everybody was just same situation. Regarding where we're gonna go here, and that is very interesting. Obviously, we are being supported by Enterprise Ireland in pretty much HPSU, and we have to, as a company, we want to be growing internationally. We are really targeting UK at the moment. We have started hiring process in the UK. We have hired 2 people already. We are targeting the private property managers and providers, or PMCs and so on. What we are trying to do is we are utilizing our current platform that we have, with a minimum amount of changes to it. We are trying to provide a similar service to private, applicants, tenants, and so on, and also give them, I suppose, the fairness that our application provides, so that you would have, for example, in Daft in Ireland, one property goes up, there would be at least 200 apply for it within first hour. So how do you really go through all those applications? And what method are you really using? Is it just you pick anybody, or you say, well, we need X amount of income, we need A, B, and C. You put the rules up there, and or you just say we support everyone same opportunity, and you create a very two-way to the applicants. And if they are successful, it's great. If they're not successful, they're being told, so they don't have to be hanging with that. So going back to the private sector, we see a massive opportunity in private sector, and a massive demand from a development perspective to support the development software side of stuff, and the sinking fund, asset management, compliance. And as you can see, more and more landlords or smaller landlords are selling their properties, not only in Ireland, but also the UK, to the biggest institutional landlords. So that means, ultimately, there should be some more standards applied to these properties, such as, they must check the, fire alarms, they must do this, they must do the compliance, they must have the insurance, and now the audit happening, and so on. So based on those requirements, our software makes sure the landlord, the service provider, is compliant, and also the tenants receiving the best services as they are. If they raise a repair, there's a timely manner they're being looked after. Or if they're not, then there is enough evidence to go to RTB, for example, or vice versa. So everything, again, the same philosophy, everything would be in the same platform. And just, can you imagine, there is a house or a property right in the middle of the circle, then you have the applicant, you have the tenant, you have the landlord, you have the service provider, you have the contractor. So all can communicate in the same ecosystem, so that it makes the whole thing more efficient. And now think about that as you have 2,000 properties to manage. So you could reduce your cost much lower, so that in a favor of not increasing the rent as much as you have to just keep the costs up and costs down. And that makes it possible to onboard more tenants, and makes it more feasible for investors or property owners to buy more properties and give it to PMCs, for example, to manage properties.
And effectively, what you're doing is what many innovators set out trying to do, and maybe came up against challenges. But so I can absolutely see the advantages in terms of streamlining, not just for the portfolio owners, but for the tenants. And the conversation across PropTech has definitely shifted in the last 2 years. So now I think we're much more aware of the importance of the user experience and the tenant experience. But I suppose one of the things I just would love to get some clarification around there, when we're talking about the tenant, that's when people have been selected. But right now, we know the challenge is that demand way outstrips supply. So can you just talk us through maybe the process for where, there's one property advertised, there are 200 applicants. How does automation help that? I know you talked about it being fair, but can you give us some details about that?
Yeah, perfect. I'm just going to go back to the example of cost rental. When cost rental came in, was the answer to be a little bit more affordable rental property within the country. I think that was a good initiative from the government to help the people who are especially working really hard and they just want to rent a property. So let's say one of our providers at the moment, they put the cost rental property up in Daft or on their website. they get literally thousands of applicants because the rent is a little bit lower and the property is being looked after and so on. So the way that our application work is, at the very beginning, based on the legislation that housing agency or Department of Housing has announced based on the cost rental, those ones are already communicated as, you have to pass certain criteria to just go to the next step. So, some people will say, well, that may not be as fair or it could be a little bit more improved, but it is as fair as it can be because it's saving people's time to even apply if you don't qualify for something because your income, a little bit higher, or you cannot actually afford it. So right at the very beginning, the people who are applying, the most likely they're qualified. And after that, you're dealing with a mass number of qualified applicants. And how do you really do? So we came up with two methods, and we also contributed to with Housing Authority as well at the very beginning. We developed this system with a random selection that we develop our own state-of-art lottery engine. So you would have, let's say, 2,000 people that applied for 7 properties under the same scheme. So looks at all the qualified people randomly would list them. And if there's absolutely no biases, there's absolutely no, preferred, based on anything. Literally, those first 7 people, they look at the documentation, they do the viewing, and there you go. They get the property, and an email will be sent to rest of people saying, well, unfortunately, you weren't selected. However, you can apply for the next one. We would notify you as soon as a more property becomes available. So this has streamlined the process that people would apply, they don't hear anything back. People would apply, they don't know, what's the status of their application. People would apply and they don't know why they weren't selected as opposed to somebody else's were selected. So very clear. And as I said, our application, firstselect.com, it's pretty much is all about that, and it's focusing on that and looking at how we could do that. And one last example is affordable purchase scheme that we are running at the moment with some local authorities. That also uses the same method. So that what is the first come, first serve? It's a very clear way rather than just applying through a paper and you submit it. You don't know what's happening. Now it's very clear to the applicant what's happening. As a result, I think it does establish a lot of trust in public services, in my opinion, and also it brings a lot of clarity. What happens? How people get selected? Why did they get it? Why did they not get it? And so on. And I think it's a very fair.
Very good, Arya. I'm glad that you gave the example there of cost rental, because actually, because that is such a new type of tenure in Ireland, I'm not even sure that people in the industry are as familiar with it as they might be, or they might understand the principle of cost rental and how it works. But in terms of the application and how it is, how these homes are assigned to people, because unlike, say, the approved housing bodies that we spoke about earlier, they're housing people from the local authority list, from the area in which the property is situated. Whereas actually for cost rental, it is a different dynamic because you're not dealing with people off the housing list. And actually, I'm not sure if people are aware that cost rental is open to people who are working. I don't think people are aware that it's open to people who aren't on local authority housing lists. And I don't think even the industry is aware that it's allocated on a lottery system. And that's a first for Ireland. We've always worked on you're on a waiting list. This is the number that you are on that list. And it's something that's communicated and people talk about being on the list for many years. But actually a lottery system to assign housing, that's really new for Ireland. So I'm glad that you went through that. And it does actually explain that while it mightn't feel fair, there is a fundamental I don't know, can we call it a fundamental unfairness or the same level of unfairness to everybody, that demand just so much outstrips supply. But just because I'm conscious of time today, I really want to focus on I know that you're moving into the delivery of private space now, or to the private market, and that's a different dynamic. So, but actually some of the same issues are still at play. So, for example, if you're working with one of our institutional investors, they have a property going up, or one of the institutional landlords, they have a property going up on the rental market. They have, say, one property, they might still have 200 applicants. How
Correct.
does your system help the people trying to allocate that private property? Yes. How does it help them allocate that? Because we know that that's the single greatest challenge that letting agents up and down the country are dealing with.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And obviously, in private sector, because it's just, there's no specific legislation for how you select the tenants, obviously. But, one thing I personally found out by talking to a lot of even private property providers and so on, everybody likes to be fair, because it's very difficult to say yes to someone and no to someone, So our application at the moment, we are just about next week onboarding our first private landlord with around more than 2,000 properties. So the way that our system also works as a first come, first serve, if someone is just applies for a property, submits all the documentation, has done a viewing, likes the property, everything checks out, the first person gets it. It doesn't, it's not a rocket science, rather than just like, well, I know this person down the road, or I know that person. By the end of the day, I think, people have surprised me. People actually more fair than I thought they're going to be. And I thought private sector probably wanted to do it in so many different ways. But it seems like it makes it easier for the letting agent to not be put in a very tough position to choose who's going to get a property or who's going to live in this hostel for another God knows how long. So things are shifting. People are, I suppose, understanding how we can streamline the situation. And if someone can afford paying the rent, and it's also according to the housing agency or government guidelines, and I think it's a 25% of income. It shouldn't be higher than that, or they recommend it to be lower than that. But by the end of the day, they have to follow something. And then as soon as those 2,000 application comes for one property, you have to handle it in an easy way. And you're talking about GDPR, you're talking about the personal information, you're talking about a variety of those information. And what do they really do with those information? It doesn't sit in somebody's mailbox. I'm just going to stop there.
Yeah. No, I genuinely I understand what you're saying, and so I can see. Look, I believe that your ethos, the approach that you've taken here, is one that's really admirable. So I'm delighted to see that you're having the level of success that you are having, and I think it's really important that people start to tackle some of the biggest housing challenges and some of the biggest problems of our day, and they just happen to be housing. So, like, from that point of view, I commend you for that. So in terms of Binaric, for yourself and the team there, what's next? What are your next moves for the next kind of 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I mean, the future of Binaric is incredibly, exciting, really. We are all excited, myself, the team, and all the hard work everybody has done. We are committed to continuing innovation and growth. And our vision is to become a global leader in property technology. And, we are well on our way to achieve that. In the coming years, we plan to expand, obviously, to international markets such as, US and Australia and a few other places. But however, for near future, we're really looking into the UK, and we'll be introducing our solution to new regions and, some foreign languages, maybe some European languages, and so on. And then also we are partnering up with some existing partners, so we can have an easier reach to their customers as well, rather than just competing with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
we also additionally
it's an exciting future.
Yes, exactly. We're really pushing the boundaries of prop tech to offer more advanced features and services, and obviously such as AI and streamlining the data in a way that everybody can use it and be more digestible.
Absolutely, and well done, and very best of luck to yourself and the team now as you go through that expansion process. And I suppose one of the things that we say quite a lot through PropTech Ireland is that, the founders we meet are generally people who have come in to solve a problem, and quite frankly, when you're building up expertise across the built environment, whether it's on the urban planning or the placemaking or the construction or indeed the delivery of real estate, whether it's in the public or private sector, you're talking about an industry that has so many problems. There are decades of opportunities ahead to try solve some of these problems as well. So it feels like one problem leads to the next. The more expertise you get, actually what you realize is that it leads to the next problem. So in a way, actually the expansion almost is dictated by the problems that your existing clients and customers are having. So really interesting, and I've really enjoyed learning about the journey of Binaric, and it was fascinating to get that kind of behind the scenes look at cost rental and how it's applied, because I think, again, such a new area of such a tenure of housing for Ireland is just it's a national curiosity. So thank you so much for taking the time. That was Arya Poor, CEO of Binaric. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out all of the other global real estate and construction shows on iPropertyRadio. Before we go, just a special word of thanks to our sponsor, PropTech Ireland, the hub for innovators, investors and for industry leaders. Thank you indeed for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode of the PropTech Hot Seat here on iPropertyRadio.